Alright, so for my honors contract for Sociology 101, I decided to do a presentation on social deviance, and my name is Rami Reyes. So, what is deviance? For sociologists, deviance doesn't necessarily mean some form of perversion or depravity. It can cover a wide sort of things, and it can be broken down into these main 2 points here. So, deviant behavior would be an action that goes against the expectations and social norms of a society. These actions don't necessarily have to be violent or extreme for there to be deviance. And typically, these violate some type of social norm, which I'll get into in just a sec. These actions and behaviors, the way they're viewed is typically more consistent. If if an action is deviant, it tends to stay deviant. When we look at social norms, those are a standard that is expected of a group in any particular situation. So these can vary more so because it's based on the people, the rules that are put in place, and how the society considers what should be a social norm in that situation or not. That's what makes them more inconsistent because the social norms, as well as the consequences or punishments for breaking them, change from place to place or based on which people you're associated with at the time. So what causes deviance? Most deviance can come from 2 main points: either a person's failure to adapt to the social norms around them, or a society's failure to get the people within it to follow those norms that were deemed acceptable. So a person can be considered deviant if they commit an act or a crime that has negative consequences for society. Examples of these could be theft, assault, things that are more severe, and things that are even less severe as well. Then when the person has this act acknowledged and recognized by members of society, when they're told that what they're doing is wrong, that's when they can classify themselves as deviant. And some of these people will face a punishment for their actions or consequences based on the severity of their uh, of what they did, and sometimes they'll be marked for deviance. An example we have of this in society nowadays is how prisoners wear a distinct uniform. So not only you can tell that they're deviant, but they themselves can tell that they're deviant. And sociologist Robert Merton believed that deviance is a critical part of society, and there's a theory that I'm going to cover in just a second related to deviance. So he came up with the strain theory, which has to do with how deviance arises when members of society don't have equal access to achieve what society has deemed to be socially acceptable goals. And there's 5 separate ways that Merton identified in how people will respond to this inequality that we see in society. The first one is conformity, where no deviation whatsoever occurs, and these people continue to pursue their goals with whatever they have available to them. Innovation is when alternative but legitimate methods and socially acceptable methods are used to reach goals that would not be as easily accomplishable given that person's circumstances. Then there's ritualism, where the socially acceptable goals are lowered and the standards are dropped so that people can achieve these goals with what they have available to them. And then there's retreatism, where a society's goals and means are rejected entirely, and these people um, do not choose to conform to what society expects of them and achieve the goals that are supposed to be achieved. And then lastly, there's rebellion, where it's like a form of retreatism but taken to another level, and some people will rebel entirely and strive to change the definition of a society's goals and acceptable means. And this can affect everyone in a society, in fact. And an example of this could be extremist groups as well. So this is a picture showing exactly the topics I was covering. And these 5 different forms of deviance, it can be shown that if both cultural goals and conventional means are accepted, people will conform. And then if conventional means are rejected while the cultural goals are accepted, the result will be innovation. And then we can see over here that we have the rebellion where it's entirely separated from the cultural goals and conventional means. They want their own means and their own goals. An example of this in society can be seen in freedom fighters or even terrorists. These people will go to extremes to achieve what they feel should be set in society. And then an example of retreatism where goals and the means are rejected could be a homeless person or a beggar that you see. Um, so examples of all of these can be seen in our everyday lives. So then on to types of deviance. So deviance can be broken into 4 separate things that are grouped into pairs. First, we'll go over formal versus informal. So formal deviance is uh, when an act is committed that breaks a certain law that society has put into place. And these can be considered as theft, assault, murder, rape. And then informal deviance is violations of social norms, which we went over earlier. And this doesn't necessarily mean that they broke a written rule or code. And this can be seen with someone wearing jeans to a wedding, or um, picking their nose, or taking off their shirt in an inappropriate place, stuff like that. And then there's also primary and secondary deviance. Primary deviance is when a person does not know necessarily that what they're doing is deviant, but people can see that what they're doing isn't right. And this is when they might acknowledge for the first time that they've been acting deviant. And this could be seen as someone who speeds regularly and then finally gets a speeding ticket. They kind of understand what they're doing now is wrong and the consequences they could face. Secondary deviance is when a person who knows or who can feel that they're being viewed as a deviant will continue to act as a deviant because of how they're viewed. So that's someone who is constantly speeding because they're told they need to stop speeding, and this could lead to even more severe consequences for everyone. So then we're going to move on to types of deviance related crimes. And while all crimes are a form of deviance, not all deviant acts are necessarily crimes. Crimes can be defined as violations of government law, which have been looked into and thoroughly documented down so that it can people will know if these are broken or not. While deviance, these are not necessarily written down. Sometimes they'll be severe. Some people can commit deviant acts that are severe, and that's usually in the realm of a crime. Or they can be something very simple and just informal, like I said earlier, picking your nose in public. So then there are multiple types of crime as well that are important to consider and look at. While they're all deviant, it's just good to see that there is differences in crime as well. Street crime, which is often committed in public, is the more public type of crimes that will be broadcasted, such as violence, gangs, and poverty that people face. And these are also known as blue collar crimes. White collar crimes are typically committed by an expert or a professional against a company or corporation. And then these are more done behind closed doors. And then there's also corporate crimes, which are variations of white collar crimes, and these are committed by a company or the leader of that company. So then the effects of social deviance. Deviance is usually viewed as a disruption to social order, and it can cause a division between people in a society. And this can lead to a bunch of further disorder and deviance later along the line. Um, but long term, deviance can actually have positive effects on society. So, for example, long-standing deviance can lead to social change. For example, dress codes used to be implemented in the workplace and at restaurants, but slowly people would stop coming in dressed as formal, and then casual days were introduced, and then this led to the removal of dress codes entirely for a good portion of places and most restaurants as well. Furthermore, the positive effects on society could stem from the fact that people are more eased into the social change as they see deviance arise around them. Slowly but surely, it becomes more commonplace, and before they know it, people have accepted a change in society. And then this is kind of good and bad. It can lead to social solidarity where a group comes together kind of to face off against like the opposing group, which could be anything ranging from one person to an entire like government. I think a good example of this would be the time like the Red Scare, where communism was, or communists in general, were seen as this opposing group. And while there was a lot of chaos going around in that time, it definitely did unite quite a few Americans together. And then this picture is taken from a human aid organization that posted it on their website known as World Vision International. And they strive to see, they look for examples of positive deviance in regards to families that are growing up in poverty. Um, a lot of these developing countries experience malnutrition among their children, and it's the leading cause of death for a lot of them. But yet there are still families in these societies that don't face as many problems. In a way, they can be seen as positive deviants because their kid comes out less malnutritioned, or doesn't face any at all, while the ones around them do. So then, the World Vision International has a branch that studies these families and looks at what they're doing versus what the others could be doing. And this is another example of positive deviance being looked at and observed to benefit our society as a whole. So, who are the deviants in society? Basically, it comes down to us. We are all deviants in some form or way. Um, and most of the deviant behavior that most of us do or commit is not super serious or super dire, the consequences of it. Like, if I was to go 5 miles above the speed limit, um, that's an example of people breaking the law. But I am guilty of that, and I'm sure a lot of people are. So basically, what it comes down to, what the question is who are the people getting arrested and in trouble for these small crimes, basically? And the fact is that some groups are more likely to be targeted and arrested for these same deviant acts that other groups might commit. And in fact, African Americans are 2.5 times more likely to be arrested than white people. That's a whole other discussion going into why this happens, but it goes to show that everyone does deviate in some way or some form, but some groups are punished more so than others. And these are my references. Um, Thank you for listening.